Hello and welcome to Out of India Theory. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the scientific attitude, the mainstream attitude towards topics like UFOs and aliens and other anomalous phenomena. And before I bring in my guest for today, I'd like to set a little bit of a background, give it a context. A few weeks ago, I read this really amazing article on Substack called Of Hubris and Hypersonics. And the author made a very sharp critique of the sort of the intellectual rigidity and the dismissiveness and the lack of, of humility of science, or to use a word which has become one of my favorite words in the last few weeks, is scientism. A sort of a dogmatic view and a rigid view on things which doesn't fit our worldview. The moment you mention UFOs and aliens, the first things people say is, okay, where's the video? And where's the evidence, where's the proof? And the author, I thought, wrote an excellent article explaining why and what and so on. In fact, I'll put a link in the description below, and I'd highly encourage you to go and read it. So I would like to thank Greg Scaduto for agreeing to join us on the channel to talk about this topic. Greg, thank you so much for joining. How are you doing?
I'm great, and thank you so much for having me. I mean, it means a ton to me that somebody from across the globe would see fit to take time out of their evening to chat with me, and I never thought something like that would happen. So thank you so much, and thanks for putting up with my scheduling issues. And I had a screaming kid in the background here a few minutes ago. I had to deal with that. So thank you really for being so patient with me and allowing me to have this opportunity.
Oh, no problem. The pleasure is all mine, because this is a topic I really enjoy talking about, and I really enjoyed your article. Now, normally when I introduce a guest, I have this list of sort of academic credentials that I reel out and everything. But in this case, I would like to go by the bio that you have on your Twitter, which is, I think, perfect, which is writer tracing the quiet courage, dignity, flaws, and love in all of us, a husband, a father of two, and a US Army veteran. So I think it kind of sort of summarizes the quiet integrity and the sensitivity and the authenticity with which you seem to approach this topic. So first of all, coming to the topic of the article that you wrote, which is the sort of the academic rigidity when it comes to people accepting UFOs and the kind of evidence they demand. Let's start with what made you write this article. Like, what was the motivation behind it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm so happy that you mentioned you wanted to talk about that one, because I haven't come across anyone who found it, who found that one resonated. I think people just said it was it's kind of dense and just, I don't know, boring. So I really appreciated that you picked that one out of all of them, because it's actually the one I think I like the most out of the stuff that I've written on this topic. But I wrote it, I guess, because on social media, specifically on X, I guess, I just kept seeing this kind of Twitter pseudo-intellectualism that was, I would say, actively stifling honest inquiry into the UAP subject. And it's pretty familiar, I think, to all of us by now, especially on TikTok, with Gen Z. You see somebody speaking with this charisma, like fluency, polish. They project an aura of credibility,
Right.
but they don't necessarily possess, I would say, substance. And someone like Nick West, and I'm not trying to attack him on a personal level. I have nothing against him, and I actually think he shows a lot more restraint and respect than a lot of interlocutors on this subject. But his performance is so composed, it discourages dissent. I think people make the mistake of seeing his kind of rhetorical polish. And here in America, like, we think of a British accent, we're like, oh, that guy's pretty sharp. And I think they're mistaking that grace for I would say, epistemological rigor. And
Right.
what concerned me a lot was the use of Occam's razor. I would say misuse of Occam's razor. And it's something, I don't know if you've seen it a lot, but people love to invoke Occam's razor.
Yeah.
And my problem with it is not as a heuristic for disciplined thinking. I think it's very useful. But what I see is people using it as more of a cudgel to end the conversation prematurely, I would say. And so, this constant fallback to Occam's razor is being invoked all the time on X as less of a guide into honest inquiry more as a way to reassure an audience, like it's okay, like this is not as weird as you think it is, and that's not what Occam is meant to do. The confidence in invoking that is misplaced. Occam's razor, it was meant to help us choose the explanation that has the fewest assumptions, but only when the explanations explain the evidence. Like that is the crucial point. And when you have all of these events happening that do not that just don't explain what we're seeing, like we
Right.
have these things that remain unexplained. Occam's razor is not meant to be an off ramp to avoid that subject, and so I think my problem with the rhetoric, it comes a lot from my background at my undergrad. I'm not I'm sure it's obvious by now. I'm not an academic. I'm not I don't have an impressive educational background, but I did go to a Jesuit university. I went to Fordham, and they force you to take these philosophy classes, which I hated at the time. I was like, why? They were texts that were dense, like really not enjoyable to read. But the one thing that I think sticks out in my memory is they teach you to resist the temptation to avoid ambiguity. And I remember I don't remember much from my philosophy coursework, but I remember stuff like Kierkegaard. He wrote something called Fear and Trembling. And it's about really like the emotional reality of living without guarantees,
Right.
sitting with the dread and the silence, the unbearable waiting. And I think he kind of captured for me like what it means to sit with uncertainty and not just tolerate it, but to feel its moral weight and to realize that it's part of living an examined life is to sit with uncertainty and embrace it and try to understand it and not run from it. And so I think that's where it came from, is just wanting to bring some scaffolding and some structure back to the conversation and not just throw out a term as a way of avoiding a conversation.
Right. But I just wanted to just go back a little bit in the sense, the topic of UFO itself, is that something? So I know that like you just explained it beautifully, justified why you wrote the article, but then the topic of UFOs itself, is this a topic that you've personally been invested in? Is it like, for example, when I think of UFOs, and it's something that I've been interested in for many, many years, and I've been like researching and studying, but then when I look at my own family, for example, it's not something that affects them, and they kind of mildly humor me, and like they tolerate me when I talk about this. But it's not a topic that, it's not like right here that you see every day, this light that shines a beam on you. It's there somewhere, it's happening somewhere in the world. It's not really concerning to everybody's daily life.
Right.
So it's not like, oh, there's a tsunami or there's an earthquake or there's a war between Russia and Ukraine. It's not like in your face, something that demands immediate attention, sort of gets relegated. So for someone to take this seriously, it must be some kind of a personal inquiry or a journey. Or I'm not saying maybe you have had your own experience or just a curiosity. Like what's your involvement with UFOs? Especially given the fact that you are also a US Army veteran, which is...
Yeah. Well, that has something to do with it. I did not get interested in the topic until June 5th, 2023, when the article in the debrief came out. And I don't even remember how I stumbled upon it. I think what happened was it was the Facebook algorithm, like it popped up somehow on my feed. And I clicked on it and I read it, and I, of course, was skeptical because I was like, what is the debrief? I was like, is this some kind of tabloid? And I looked it up, and I was like, okay, it's not quite a tabloid, but I'm a little concerned about, frontier science. Like, what does that mean? But then I looked up who Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal were. And Ralph Blumenthal, New York Times journalist for 50 years. And I was like, that's a lot of time to be at the New York Times. And then I found that Leslie Kean was this very, she's a very respected investigative journalist, who has written for the Times. She's written for a lot of different publications. And I was like, okay, well, these are serious journalists. And then I looked up like who David Grush was. I see, okay, he's a GS-15, which is a high-ranking pay grade in our government, and he's with the National Reconnaissance Office, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. He's cleared for presidential level access. He's the guy who would walk the UAP briefing to the president and speak to him about it. So this is not some guy doing psychedelics on his porch at 3 a.m. Like this is somebody with a very, very high level of access and security clearances. And like having been in the military, like, you interact with people like this from time to time, and they're just not people prone to fanciful
Yeah.
delusions. They're just very highly vetted people. And I started to take it seriously. And then I saw that, I think it was NPR and The Guardian also ran similar stories. And I was like, okay, that means that they verified Grush's bona fides. So he is who he says he is. And at that point, I was like, all right, there's like a 95% certainty that he's acting in good faith, and this isn't some kind of elaborate hoax or some kind of misunderstanding. Like this is a serious thing. And I remember being like, I couldn't go back to, I was mesmerized by this, and I was like, what
Yeah.
is happening? I started to text all my friends, and nobody cared, and I couldn't get anyone interested in it. And then the hearings happened, and I was like, well, surely this will, build some momentum around the subject. But still, and this was remarkable to me, that you could have somebody sitting in front of the House Oversight Committee testifying under oath, under penalty of perjury, saying that there are reverse engineering programs that go back decades that do not have constitutional oversight. And the purpose of these programs is to reverse engineer non-human technology. He used the word non-human technology. This was mind blowing to me. And I'm walking around in a daze, like trying to figure out, like, am I living in some kind of a like simulation? Like, why does nobody care about this? And it was a
Right.
feeling of loneliness, of being deeply curious and seeing meaning in something, but not having anyone care about it. And that's something that I couldn't think of a time in my life where that happened to me. And I started to get on social media more. I wasn't much of a social media user, but I found that like X was the only place where you could see people talking about it. And I started to see constant ridicule of David Grush and people like Luis Elizondo, Tim Gallaudet, and it bothered me because in the Army, like we had something called a warrior ethos, where you don't leave a man behind. You look out for the men and women on your left and right. And to see somebody like Stephen Greenstreet just annihilate the character of somebody like Tim Gallaudet, it bothered me on a personal level, because they were fellow veterans. They were much more accomplished and impressive than I am. But like, hey, those are my comrades in arms, and it bothered me that people who knew nothing about the topic, journalists who had like no level of access that would position them to have a clear line of sight into the subject, were dragging their names through the mud for attention. Bothered me deeply. And so I made my first ever X post, and this was at the time of the New Jersey drone incidents, where people were reporting these drones that they were seeing in the skies. And I live in Morris County, New Jersey, which was kind of the eye of the storm for that. And
Sorry, just
I
to
finally,
interrupt you. Just to
yeah,
interrupt you. Did you actually
sure.
see them yourself where you live in New Jersey?
So I saw something that I didn't know what it was, but it wasn't. I wouldn't consider it like an experience. I saw it in the sky, and I was like, "What is that?" And I couldn't tell quite what it was. It didn't really look like a plane, but it wasn't
Right.
enough for me to be like, "Oh, I had an experience." But my wife actually said she saw. I wasn't home, but she said she saw something when she was in the backyard that was not a plane, and it was very low, and it scared her. So I didn't see it. I'm just relying on her, what she told me. But I believe her, of course. She's not, she's not a UFO nut. She's not like, into
Yeah.
this stuff, and so she would have no motivation to make up a story. So, I was concerned about it. So I made a post, and something about it, I think, just struck a nerve with people. And I think it was maybe because I used my face, I used my real name, and I said, look, I'm a veteran. These guys are vets. They seem like, honest people who are just trying to do the right thing. And basically, why don't we stop laughing at them? And it was a call to action for fellow veterans. Like, hey, if you're a vet, let's stop pretending that this is all a hoax, because there's something going on. And it was my only post, and I had like 3 followers. And then over 48 hours, it got like 170,000 views somehow. It was actually Lester Nary. He reposted it, I think, and then from there it just and then Luis Elizondo reposted it, and then it just got a lot of attention. And so that's how I started writing about it. So sorry for rambling, but that was kind of my UAP
Right.
backstory.
Right. Now that's very interesting because, okay, so personally, this is something that I believe in, and I truly believe, even though I haven't had like a close encounter or something. I mean, just like you, I've seen stuff in the sky which, I mean, which were definitely not planes, especially back many years back when we didn't even have drones flying around back here in India.
Hmm.
So, I mean, for sure, it may or may not have been a flying saucer, but then I truly believe that we're not alone in the universe. And there are many, many, for many reasons. Maybe it's too complicated philosophically to get into that now at this point. But then, just to play the devil's advocate here, just like the people who are debunk and demand scientific proof have come with, like you say, there's this quiet confidence with which they advance their theories and the credentials with which they come, like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Mick West. You could also argue that the people on the other side who come with impressive credentials of being astute observers, like veterans and army people and pilots and people with, so how can we also just take their word at face value? Just
Hmm.
like you can't take them at face value, isn't it fair that people, as a neutral observer, that I demand more proof? Because it's kind of convenient for the observer to see, that okay, this is something I can't reveal. I know this, but I cannot reveal because of this, this NDA or this law, which will send me to jail if I disclose. So it's kind of, how does one navigate that? Because there is that thing that prevents real, proof from coming out in the public, right?
Yeah. Well, this is something I think people don't understand. Like classified information is very serious. Like as someone who's handled classified information, like you have to be very cautious. Um, and like the U.S. military, like they don't mess around with that. Like you can go to jail if you divulge information that you're not authorized to divulge. It's that simple. And so to use Grush's inability to provide the actual physical evidence, to use that against him is to betray a lack of understanding, I think, of what classified means and what the consequences are for publicly divulging it. And so it shows to me that there's this misapprehension that there's a dearth of information, there's a dearth of data, a lack of data available. And that's not the case at all. Like the barrier does not appear to be the scientific data. It appears to be a political barrier that is preventing the information from being released to the mainstream. And so that should be the focus of our attention, is how do we know the data exists, so how do we release it in a responsible way that doesn't compromise national security, and doesn't put people in jail that don't deserve to be in jail? Like David Grush, he shouldn't have to move to Moscow and leave his family and live in Russia or somewhere where there's no extradition treaty with the U.S. Because he has a conscience. Like that's not fair to him or Elizondo or any of them. And so the focus should be on how do we figure this out as a society, and it certainly shouldn't be to laugh at them and to dismiss it. Like let's at least look and see what the evidence is. Let's open the folder
Right.
instead of just pretending that there's nothing in the folder.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, just the other point you mentioned in your article was about, like how, for example, somebody as respected a science communicator as Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, who has a huge number of followers online, said like, where are the clear videos, like where is photographic and video proof? And then, which is true, because now I feel like with AI and when all this today with computer graphics and everything, we are at a stage where it's like a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of a situation, where if you don't provide video proof, then it's not accepted. But then if you provide really clear video proof, then it's like obviously AI and not real. So
Yeah.
that's another tricky thing. But then
Yeah.
just to come back to the point that he was making, I would also understand that if you had some kind of exotic technology which could travel at such high speeds and what of sort of was warping space-time around it, or gravity kind of technology, well, I can imagine why it might be difficult to get more than a blurry image, or why it might need like specialized equipment like thermal sensors and other equipment which only military may possess. And therefore, the data that is captured will obviously, like you argue, will be classified and it will not be available on public
Yeah.
domain. So that's an argument that you make, right? On when it comes to
Yeah. I mean,
availability
so
of
Neil
evidence.
deGrasse Tyson, like he's one of the public figures that like I was most disappointed in because I grew up like a lot of people around the world. Like I grew up listening to him, and he's so charismatic and brilliant, and he's just this towering intellectual figure that I just always respected the way he could communicate. And I don't pretend to be more educated than him or more brilliant than he is or more sophisticated. But it was a head scratcher, like him going on a talk show, and people just ate this up. They loved it. But he said something like we basically have smartphones in everyone's hand, and so we're outsourcing to 8 billion people the task of capturing this on video, and everyone has high quality cameras in their pockets, yet we don't have any evidence. And I listened to that and I was like, what is he talking about? Like, have you ever tried to take a picture of something at 30,000 feet with your iPhone? Like, what kind of iPhone does Neil have that can do that? But it looks like a Monet painting. Like if you try to take a picture of a dot in the sky, that you don't see anything with any resolution really. And the whole argument is that these objects appear to be defying our understanding of the laws of physics. So why would you invoke something that rests upon the laws of physics that we understand as a way of dismissing something that's saying, well, it's defying the laws of physics? It seems circular and illogical. And I just remember being so disappointed. It's like one of your heroes kind of turning out to be not who you thought they were. It's like, Elizondo has brought up the idea of microorganisms. Like, are you going to say that, because with the equipment that we have, you can't see microorganisms, that they don't exist? Like, that would be absurd. So why doesn't the same logic apply to something that we don't yet understand but happens to be in our skies? Yeah.
Right. And then of course now with AI and everything, I'd be really doubtful. If I find a very clear picture of a UFO, I'd probably be more suspicious of it than if it was blurry.
I mean, you could interview a reptilian on here, and like he could be a legitimate, bona fide reptilian, and then nobody would believe it. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the other interesting trend that I saw is based on, I've been looking at this phenomena, reading about this phenomena for a long time. In the past, a lot of the reports would come from ordinary people, housewives, regular people who saw stuff. And then there'd be like maybe one or two, incidents reported by a highly reputed person, a pilot or a policeman or something like that. And that would be like a standout. And now it's like with so many people coming forward, you have so many pilots and so many people who've been in the military who talk about this. And then now it almost feels like if somebody who's a random guy who's a clerk or an accountant or somebody on the street sees something, it's almost like, oh, he's a regular dude. Even he's seeing something, It's almost like it's flipped. And I find that very interesting in this attitude towards disclosure. But then you mentioned legislation. So what is the solution? Because I have seen, of course there are laws which forbid people from providing evidence, of course. But then there are people coming forward to a certain extent. So what is the thing? So is there something we can do to make this less dangerous for them? Like what's the way forward?
Well, I think if you read the UAP Disclosure Act legislation, like as it was originally written, not the version that actually made it into the National Defense Authorization Act, but the original version that was, it didn't pass in the House. I think it makes a lot of sense. You have a panel of experts who have full access and can review everything. And there's a deliberate discussion, a transdisciplinary discussion about the data. And a decision is made among this panel of experts on what should be released for mainstream scientific study for the advancement of human civilization, and what is too dangerous to release to the public. I don't know how else you would do it other than to get responsible adults in the room to look at it and to figure it out. And to be opposed to that is very odd. And especially to be opposed to that as Mike Rogers and Mike Turner, the two representatives who have been identified as gutting the legislation that called for the language that called for the panel and for eminent domain over non-human technology. Why are they so concerned about that? Like, why is that what they decided to take out? It certainly begs a question that's worth asking and worth getting a response from. That isn't no comment, I would say.
Right. I'd be interested to know what is your take on this. I mean, this whole reverse engineering, because I've read that, like so many technologies like lasers and, like chips and so many things that we commonly see in use today were supposed to have been reverse engineered. I mean, there's no real way of knowing until it's
Yeah.
declassified. But then, if, as it is claimed, it fell into the hands of private contractors and people, obviously it's somebody far more powerful than government and politicians, somebody who's clearly not even in the public domain. So
Hmm.
like there's always this bogey of the the deep state or the military
Hmm.
industrial complex. So what is it that you think we are dealing with here? Is it
Well, I
because
mean,
clearly it's not just a
let
common
me start.
politician?
Yeah, I mean, let me start by saying I don't know, but I have read some stuff about it. I read Philip Corso's. You ever read the day after
The day
Roswell?
after Roswell, yeah.
Yeah, and what he talks about, and I don't think he was ever discredited. I could be wrong, but I mean, he was this intelligence officer who served in World War II, and he got out, and he was supposedly tasked with seeding technology that was recovered from various crashes, seeding this technology with defense contractors. And what he said in the book was that I think it was Kevlar, night vision, fiber optics, uh, transistor, and microchip all came from these recovered vehicles. Um, I have no way of verifying that. You don't. But he doesn't seem to have a history of making up stories. Um, and it seems like if you were uh, to have reverse engineering programs that were somehow hidden from congressional oversight, that would be the way to do it, to seed it in the private sector. Uh, these companies, they're immune to FOIA requests. And so when you don't have it in the hands of government, but in the hands of private defense contractors, that's kind of the perfect place to squirrel it away. So like that's how you would do it if that was your goal. So it seems to make sense that it seems to logically follow that like what he's saying in the book happened actually happened. I don't know if that answers
Right.
your question.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to imagine because I've read, incidents of, what happened. I mean, allegedly happened at Roswell, the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and how the
Hmm.
military was involved in recovering these crafts and alien bodies. I'm just wondering. I mean, of course, there's no way of knowing. There's so many books written about it. How does it fall into the hands of a private person? Because it's obviously recovered by military and
Yeah,
government.
well, I mean,
People who are
that was what he said in the book. That was his job, was to bring it to these defense contractors, and he said that he would bring them something that they recovered, and that he wouldn't tell them where it came from. The office that he worked for had some ambiguous. It was an opaque name, like I can't remember what it was, but like Office of Foreign Technology Recoveries or something. So people would probably, these defense contractors would naturally assume, oh, this was recovered from some Russian jet or something, and they wouldn't tell them. They wouldn't tell Raytheon or Lockheed or whoever it was, like, yeah, we got this from a saucer. Like they would just say, hey, we recovered this. And, Merry Christmas. You can admit and profit off of it, and pretend that you discovered it through your research and development programs. So I guess that's
right.
how it. I mean, people like Philip Corso supposedly would be the liaison between the whatever recovery operations were happening for these vehicles and the defense contractor.
Right. But it also makes it interesting because if somebody was manufacturing a story like this, then anybody would probably, like, let's say, for example, chips or transistors or lasers, people just have to sort of trace back the provenance of research, where it came
Mm,
from. And
yeah,
at some point, there'll be like one inventor or someone credit. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
obviously, it's not just one person, it's like a bunch of people over a period of
yeah,
time. So it
yeah,
might be easy to, I don't know, like dig back in and find out where it came from, I guess, in terms of
yeah.
the mainstream
Well,
explanation.
yeah, he kind of addressed it. That's an interesting question. I never heard anyone like actually ask that question. But he, in the book, I remember he said that he would give them the technology, and that they would document that it was discovered through their research, even though it wasn't. They would just say, "Oh yeah, we figured out how to do this." So I mean, I don't know, like,
Yeah.
uh, what the documentation looks like, but I don't think you wouldn't think it would be that hard to fabricate that. Like, oh, we had a really smart guy and he figured out the whole night vision thing. So
Right. Yeah, just
yeah,
it's just mind-boggling how something as large, and it must have involved like a lot of, like, hundreds of people over a long period of time, how something like this is managed to be kept secret, like, which of course there's law and threat and everything. But then it's just mind-boggling how something like this can, something so momentous and Like something like aliens, for example, could be kept secret. That's usually like the
Yeah.
logic thrown around.
I mean, people say that a lot, but I don't find it implausible. I mean, when the US government doesn't want the public to know about something, most of the time you're not going to know. Like the B-2 stealth, like nobody knew about the B-2 stealth bomb, like the development of it. Um, and that was one case that's cited as like, the most number of people involved, but the least number of leaks. Like you had hundreds of people working on this project, not a single leak. And so I think there's a tendency, like when national security is at stake, people aren't going to gossip. They're not going to be gossip queens about what's going on. They're going to be very quiet. And
Right.
I just don't think it's implausible. I mean, as someone like even just serving in the military in a line unit in the artillery, like I was in Korea, like there's classified battle plans. Like Ramesh is not going to get battle plans for,
Sure.
a North Korean, deterring a North Korean invasion. How would you get that? You're not going to. I wasn't
Right.
going to give it to you. So yeah.
Right. But then the other argument that people make is, which is, I mean, is also other governments. Obviously, if there are things flying around, visiting Earth, a lot of people ask me is, why is it only a USA centric thing? Like
Yeah, yeah.
why is it only America who sees aliens? And then I always tell them personally, I believe this is not true, because I think there are things being in the sky all over the world. And personally, when people ask me why don't we see them as much in India, I think it's very simple. It's a reporting deficit.
Yeah.
People are simply culturally not really into that, and the media is not interested in that. Even though there are a few isolated articles that I could still find,
Hmm.
but and I could say in a very paradoxical way the opposite. Like in the West, especially in North America, it's the opposite. There's a reporting surplus. There is
Yeah,
so much
yeah,
of interest. There is
yeah.
so much
That's
of
so
interest in
well
this.
well said. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've never heard
especially
anyone.
through.
This is a great question. I just never heard someone talk about it like this. It's such a good point, which is that like when you think about the aerial, the aerial school and was it
Oh yeah,
Rua,
in
Rua
Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe? It's
Yeah,
like okay, so
yeah.
like you had local news stations like who people in the U.S. or in Britain or in India were probably like who cares about what some news station in Kenya or was it Zimbabwe? Sorry,
Zimbabwe. Yeah.
what news station in Zimbabwe is saying about aliens like. Uh, so it's perfectly plausible to think that, as you say, a reporting surplus in the U.S. makes it appear as if it's only happening in the U.S. or that we have just a bunch of crazy zealots, UFO zealots in the U.S. that don't exist in more civilized parts of the world. But like, it's obviously just people consume our media a lot. We have media giants, and they talk about it, and it's like what's it called, like an accessibility bias. So like you just see it coming from America because it's
Yeah.
accessible, and so you think it's only there, but it's not. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it also has led in my assessment a very interesting situation where there's so much of demand, especially through Hollywood and media and everything, that it's actually created a whole industry behind it. I mean, there's
Hmm.
movies being profited, people
Yeah.
who want to, there's money to be made, books to be written, and I mean, justifiably, I mean, why not? Because if the people have genuinely something to contribute, yeah, sure. But then naturally, this has led to a lot of, I would say, because of this surplus reporting with people interested in it, a lot of like false reporting, misidentified reporting. People, I would say about 90% of stuff they see in the sky could be a kite or something like a drone or something they just, or a classified thing we just don't know about. And I guess in a strange sort of way, it makes it easier to debunk because a lot of the data is noise because of this
Hmm.
reporting
Yeah.
surplus.
Well, it's the Mick-West conundrum where like you have so many false reports that it's easy to pick one particularly silly one. Like I saw he did one that there was a report, I forget what country it was in, but it turned out to be like a theme park or something. He's like, "Oh, look how ridiculous this is," and he focuses on these individual cases um, that are like particularly ridiculous, like a Batman balloon. That was like Stephen Reed Street loved that one. There was like a Batman balloon that was like mistaken as a UFO. Obviously there are going to be false reports, and this is something James Fox said, kind of famously on one of those, talking head interviews. He's like, we don't care about those. Like, we don't care about the false positives. We care about the ones that are real. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean it boggles my mind because this phenomenon has been reported for centuries. It's not even a modern phenomenon. It's taken
Hmm.
on so many different forms that like it's simply inconceivable to me that everybody is just making stuff up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Well, I want to. I want to get your opinion on this, Ramesh, because I have Indian colleagues, and of course, I talk about UFOs at work. Why not? Who doesn't?
Yeah.
And I'll ask them about it. And one of them said to me, he was like, "Yeah, it's not. There's not like as much of a stigma over here. Like we just kind of accept, like, yeah, there are UFOs." And that was so fascinating to me that, and I want to know if you find that there's less of a stigma because of kind of the spirituality and Eastern philosophy is more open to a non-physicalist worldview.
Yeah, actually, this is the point I was going to come to, so I'm glad you opened it up. So
Mhm.
I would say it's a little bit more nuanced. I think the whole concept of alien doesn't exist in,
Hmm.
I would say, Indian or maybe even the Eastern cosmology, the way we,
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
world and the universe is looked at.
Yeah.
Because, because I feel alien means that there's an instant othering, there's an instant separation. It's
Yeah.
like it's almost as if the Western worldview, the scientific, rational worldview, has clearly established beyond a point of doubt that we are alone and this is it. This is material. This is physical. What you can touch, see, feel, measure is real. Everything
Yeah.
else is, like not the subjective world is unreal. And
Yeah.
so there's a need to invoke like this. There's this othering, saying, okay, there are these aliens who come from elsewhere. But then in the Indian and probably Eastern viewpoint, we kind of we already live in a more than human world. In the sense, there are like in the Hindu tradition, there are so many layers of lokas and
Yeah.
realms that are like seven above, seven below.
Hmm.
So these won't even be aliens; they'll just be deities and spirits and elementals, and they'll automatically get categorized into other acceptable forms of beings that inhabit these other worlds. And and of course, a lot of modern educated Indians will tend to lean towards, you know, a materialistic interpretation. But then it's very like for someone like a regular person on the street, if you say alien, I'm like, okay, like it's just yeah, sure, why not? Because yeah, there are beings up who are not just human. There are so many categories of beings above and below us. And as a person, my dharma is to focus on what I have to do to attain this step. It's more sort of philosophical and religious. There are so many things. It's a very complex topic. So yeah, in that sense, it's sort of implicitly accepted that we are not the only living being on the planet. So it's very interesting because it's a very non-technological acceptance. People don't think of them as physical crafts. They just think of consciousness and beings and
Yeah.
deities and things like that who can be invoked and prayed to, and who can appear and give you interact with humanity in that way, which is kind of something I wanted to pick your brains on also. There's a dissonance. There is this material physical craft that people talk about, some things you can measure and read and hold in your hands, but then also the way they seem to be like a problem of consciousness itself, how they
Yeah.
interact with people and so on.
Yeah. I love this line of conversation. I really hope you continue to get your voice out there because I think the Eastern Hemisphere just has a different paradigm. Like you just have a different way of seeing the world because of the philosophies that emerged throughout history, um, and you don't shy away from wonder, I guess, and from a non-physicalist interpretation of events. Um, the West wasn't always like that. When you go back to the ancient Greeks with non-dualism, and when you look at the Christian mystics, Sufism, Muslims, um, transcendentalism, uh, you have a long history before the Industrial Revolution of uh, the soul, I guess, like of people thinking deeply about what is beyond the material world that's worth thinking about. And when I hear these whistleblowers talk about it, the word they don't use is alien or extraterrestrial. And this is what drives me insane about the DoD statements, like the public, the PR, the Susan Go statements, and it's extraterrestrial, extraterrestrial, extraterrestrial. Like read the Arrow report. They don't say non-human intelligence. And then at one point, Susan Go was asked to to reissue the statement basically saying NHI, and she wouldn't do it. And there's these moments in Grush's interview where it's the things that he doesn't say that are more important than what he does say. Like at one point, Nancy Mace asks him, "Is it a spaceship that you recovered?" And he says, "Well, I guess you could think of it like that. So it's not a spaceship. It's something that came to us from some other plane of existence." I don't know how else to interpret that statement. I guess you could think of it like a spaceship. That means that it's not quite moving through space. It's moving through something else. What's that? I don't know. Maybe there's something to all of this spirituality, New Age mysticism, and Eastern philosophy. All of these different schools of thought. Maybe it's not all nonsense, and maybe this small speck of time that we've been in since the Industrial Revolution, this cacophony of scientific materialism, maybe that's not all there is to understand about the world. And I think that's such an important point that is just glossed over and is not talked about. And I'm so glad that you're interested in it, because there are so many people who aren't. And I just hope that more people will stop scoffing at that concept. So.
Right, and also I believe I'm not sure if it was Mike Barber, one of those people who talked about retrieving this egg-shaped craft.
Yeah,
I think somebody mentioned feeling a very, very deep and profound sense of a feminine energy, of a divine energy interacting with him. And I feel like this is also a common topic in religion, like in Gnosticism and everything. I mean, so the concept of the feminine exists in Indian spirituality, but in general, I feel like one of the things that has happened in spirituality is a suppression of the feminine, and to look at God as a man, as a father. And a lot of traditions go back as a sort of a rebellion against that Gnosticism and even the Shakti tradition in India, where the feminine is supposed to be obviously, with ideas like ideas of the womb and creation of the universe and everything like this, play a more central role. And it's very interesting that they perceive a feminine energy. And a few people who didn't want to come on my podcast, but they told me personal experiences they've had, not with craft, but then lights that shone in the sky, and this feeling of, they said, how if you don't show fear and show a feeling of love and acceptance, they sort of seem to expand and sort of come. And then one person reported feeling the presence of a being, and more than one person actually, which is very distinctly feminine.
Mm-hmm.
And that for me is very interesting, because this could have easily led to so many of these records of spiritual experiences people have had in the past, that people have recorded as, deities and gods and goddesses.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, how would you even study something like this? It would be, imagine if flying saucers don't fit into a scientific worldview, like this would be like somewhere far out, It's so impossible to touch this with science. That's a very important problem to solve, I think.
Yeah. And this guy Barber, his first name escapes me. Do you remember what his first?
Was it Mike Barber?
Jeff. I feel bad for not remembering, but his interview, first of all, he's moved to tears by this experience. For him to be faking that, he would have to be a Juilliard-trained thespian, of the absolute first order. He has Robert De Niro beat by a long shot. This guy clearly was not making up a story. He had a very emotional experience, which, as you described, was this feeling of love, feminine energy, and the accounts. If you read John Mack, Abduction, they're just replete with spirituality. Most of them are not. I mean, there are some accounts that seem to be purely physical, but there are many that are very much not solely physical. These beings that they interact with appear to be very telepathic. They're a lot of times the abduction encounters that are described. And again, John Mack, Harvard Medical School psychiatrist, Pulitzer Prize winner, respected in his field for the work of on trauma that he did throughout his career, becomes interested in this, finds people, hundreds of people, who have no psychological disorders psychiatric problems that he can think of, or that he can discover, who had normal jobs, lawyers, bankers, doctors, business people. They're normal people, yet they report these experiences. So these are not just interviews. This is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist having a clinical discussion with them, and they're all reporting these things. Um, so I agree. I mean, the spiritual component is something that may be at the center of all of this, and it may be a domain of of our reality that we just don't understand yet. Just like as Elizondo says with microorganisms, who would have thought that these little beasties would be, hiding under the microscope, but there they are. So,
Right. I mean, there's also this theory that I don't know if you read. I also I did a podcast with a scientist called an astronomer called Eamon Anspro from Ireland, and a
mm,
bunch of them, many people. I mean, not many, maybe a few more scientists like him. They came out of the paper that in the upper atmosphere, there are actually plasma-based living organisms that we haven't discovered yet. It's like an entirely new
mm,
species. They are like based, like their body is based of plasma, but they are like living organisms, and they show some kind of rudimentary consciousness and so on. So there's a whole new paper that's come up, and I mean I haven't read it yet, but there's that theory also. But before I move to the sort of the final section, I just wanted to quickly mention 2 points and get your opinion on that. One is, what about the idea that other governments would have also recovered, and there's crashes in China, crashes in Italy, crashes in Russia, maybe who knows what other country, and
mhm.
what would have happened to that? Do you think the United States has so much reach that they would have made it, the military contractors would have been able to recover that, or maybe it's gone into somebody else's hands, so there's someone else out there with reverse engineered technology as well?
Well, I think it's pretty well documented that Russia had, especially during the Cold War, there have been lots of documents that have emerged that suggest that they had a crash recovery program, and we know that China has one now, as does Japan. Well, Japan, I think we know they have their equivalent of um, like a UAP caucus in their legislature, right? So, I mean, absolutely, this phenomenon is happening all around the world. The U.S. is involved because we have our tendrils, everywhere. But certainly, it's well documented. I can't, off the top of my head, like cite specific documents right now, but we know that these accounts from Russia, from China. I don't know about China, but we know Russian documents have leaked that suggested encounters have happened, that they had a program and still have a program for the study of UAPs within their defense, establishment. So that I think is not really in dispute at this point. And we know that the U.S. has a tendency to just show up, like in Brazil, I think.
The
What was it?
Varginha incident.
Yes, and the Varginha incident, the account was that like a bunch of, U.S. Uh, you know, people who didn't identify themselves but just showed up out of nowhere, kind of. So, I mean, yes to all of that, I guess, is what it seems to be.
Yeah, the men in black get around really fast. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's been funny to me like how much of that movie is turning out to be, it appears to be somewhat accurate.
Yeah.
Like how they would report the alien stuff in the tabloids, and it's like the same today. Like you have our tabloids will like have no hesitation with covering the topic, and are in some cases doing it with more integrity than the New York Times is. So yeah.
Yeah, it's almost as if members of Hollywood are actually being tipped off or informed
Yeah,
by
I
people
mean,
in the
there's a
know,
lot
which
of
is
stories
another
about that.
allegation.
Yeah, like Spielberg supposedly had connections to the Defense Department, and they, wanted him to make it part of the zeitgeist, I guess, part of the cultural imagination of Americans that there's life out there. I mean, I don't know if that's been verified. Maybe it has been. Maybe he's talked about it. I just don't know. But
Right.
yeah.
But one thing that does bother me, and maybe with your the army background is something you can throw light on, is especially in the US and probably with these other countries, the discourse on UAP is always, I even noticed with Luis Elizondo, is always from a standpoint of security and threat. It's
hmm
always seen at it from that lens. I would imagine if we were talking about life beyond Earth and life from other dimensions visiting us and interacting, a higher form of life, like I would probably approach it with the most open sense of curiosity and love and like open arms. Do you think it's okay to look at everything from the narrow prism of like military security, national security, in that sense?
No, I mean, there absolutely appears to be a very serious national security concern because of uh, how paradigm changing and consequential the technology is. There's pretty obvious, I think, that there's a secret arms race happening to master this technology. in the same way that the atomic bomb, that we had with the Manhattan Project. Because if you have technology that can bend space and time, you can deliver, a knockout blow to any country, with the snap of your fingers. Like, who doesn't want that? So yeah, I think the suppression, and I said this on another podcast, like a lot of the suppression may be in our best interest. Like maybe there's a concern that they don't want there to, the U.S. defense establishment and government doesn't want a groundswell of public outrage to tip our hand into revealing what we have or don't have, because that could be the end. That could be, game over if it turns out that, we actually don't have the technological, prowess to best China or Russia. Maybe they're actually ahead of us. And when you think about it in a game theoretic sense, like you want that unknown to be there. And so I think that's a dimension of it that is kind of lost on people who just are curious and I just want to know about aliens. Well, there's a lot more to this that has to do with our existential security than people, I think, are willing to talk about. And not every invocation of national security is a dog whistle for, government suppression, undue suppression of information. Yeah.
Right. And just the other quick point I wanted to talk about is, where do you think the current disclosure is going? Because do you really think, personally, I believe that when you talk about disclosure, it's been happening all along. They've been showing themselves in different ways to different people on many different levels. So I guess it depends on what you mean by disclosure. If by disclosure you mean like everybody's like lined up in the sky, dropping down, in the proverbial White House lawn or somewhere else, and then announcing themselves, why would they do that? Or if it even would be like that, or governments what is disclosure anyway? What form should it take? And how do you think the efforts right now, do you think, is it going in that direction? Is it even possible? Or
my personal belief is that, the White House lawn thing, didn't it already happen in 1952 and nobody really cared? Like, wasn't there a swarm of flying discs over the White House in 1952 that nobody wants to talk about? But I think it's my personal belief, and I'm no expert, but my personal belief is that it's going to take a U.S. president or a similar head of state to come out and say that it's real for a paradigm shift to occur. I think James Fox is great. He's brilliant, but I think he could make a documentary where he interviews an alien and no one would take it seriously until a political figure forces us to accept the reality of it. And I think that happens at the top. That happens with the U.S. president. And do anything that's not in his own self-interest. So I don't have high hopes for him acting on moral clarity. But I think it will fall on heads of state, leaders in government, to have the courage to be honest with the American people or with their citizens. That's just my personal opinion. What do you think?
Yeah, personally, I think maybe there's a little divergence in my opinion, because as far as I see it, a lot of people who are far more credible than perhaps the President of the United States, for example, like people you might just consider upright and honest, just individuals, like you said, mentioned David Grush, and people who laid their lives for the country, like soldiers and army people, because who can be more honorable than some kind of a politician sitting behind a desk talking about it? When people like that come out with claims, and highly credible people like school teachers and and policemen, and even the Canadian, I read Paul Hellyer, the former Canadian defense minister, came out and said that.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah. And even that did not cause as big a ripple as one might have hoped.
Yeah.
So I feel like personally,
in Israel, it was the head of their space force, basically their equivalent of the space force, talking about, he said something wild. I think he said something about like a galactic whatever. I forgot how he phrased it, but he was like, yeah, there's life out there, and everyone just kind of shrugged.
Yeah, so I'm kind of at a loss because I don't know what disclosure would even take or would even mean at this point, because even if you make all these amendments and reveal everything, people can always say, oh, this is CGI, or they can always find something to shoot it down. So I feel until and unless there's a personal experience, somebody like every single person sees things and experiences things personally in their own backyard, which is quite possible. When if there's like a worldwide phenomenon. Until that happens, I think there is no substitute for that. In a way. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know how
yeah.
that would be possible.
Well, I'm gonna. Uh, I I agree with you, and there are kind of whispers, I guess, that, and I'm not uh, an authority on this in any way, but there are discussions about there being like the idea of like the NHI is in control of this process. People have I can't remember who it was now who said that, but multiple people have said that who've been involved in some of these discussions, and I don't know. You know, I don't know what's going to ultimately tip the scales, other than a legislative process unfolding that allows information to be released, and a U.S. president or a similar elected leader forcing the population of their country to acknowledge what appears to be reality. And it's not going to be. I mean, the fact is that the New York Times, CNN, the Wall Street Journal, these are the serious outlets, and they appear to all be compromised by the DoD. Uh, you know, and I had an exchange with Joel Schechtman, who wrote this Wall Street Journal article, where I asked him to defend it, basically, and he just shrugged, and he gave me a non-answer. But there's this phenomenon of access journalism where these reporters, these papers, they're for-profit institutions. They don't want the spigot to get shut off on exclusives that are fed to them from the Defense Department or the CIA or the intelligence community. So they play ball and they cooperate, and they do what's in the best interest of their shareholders. Yeah, so it's not going to be the papers. It's going to come from the top.
I mean, this can be a whole podcast in itself. I mean, we don't want to get too much into it, because also the money trail, and to pull this off, there's such a huge. I forget the name of the lady who was recently on many podcasts who spoke of these missing, how the Pentagon failed so many audits, and there's this
Yeah.
missing trillions of dollars that could have gone into black projects, and how such large amounts of money can be funneled into all these things without anybody knowing. And the
Hmm.
money trail will probably lead you to what's happening more than anything else.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something I've talked about on social media a ton. The audits of the Defense Department began in 2017. There have been seven since then. Every year, the DoD has failed in the most spectacular way possible. They failed, which is disclaimer of non. I forgot the opaque accounting term that just says the auditors basically gave up because the records were so messy that they couldn't even verify, they couldn't trace the funds. And the amount of unsubstantiated transactions on the general ledger of the Defense Department's budget is, it's in the trillions. It's over 3 trillion. It exceeds the GDP of India. And so people don't really understand what I think the number 3 trillion means, and the scale of it. But as a taxpayer, we basically don't know where our tax dollars are going.
Right.
So yeah, tracing them. If somebody had the will to trace the money and it had the access to do it, I'm sure it would answer a lot of questions. Yeah.
Yeah. That'll be such a complicated, like a what do they call it, a rabbit hole to get into, and then chase
Yeah.
down and then find. So finally, as we close, I'd be interested to know, like, besides UFOs, like, what are your other? Is this something that you're looking at more deeply now? Now that this has generated a lot of buzz and a lot of interest, your articles and your profile on social media, or are you also involving yourself with other things?
Yeah. I have said, and what motivates me really is I need to feel something on an emotional level to write about it. And one of the pieces that kind of I guess grew my following the most was an essay I wrote about my son who has nonverbal autism, and I just wrote about what it was like to be a parent, um, and I just wrote honestly about like what it felt like, and what it was like with my wife and me, and I I was blown away by how many fathers like reached out to me, how many people generally, but it really struck a chord, I think, because men are taught still. It's gotten better, but I think we're taught to suppress emotion and to not talk about it and to be strong and silent. And I think just writing honestly about the emotional experience of that uh, was in a way kind of cathartic for a lot of parents who have kids on the autism spectrum. And one of the things that was really cool that came out of that was a nonprofit organization called the Autism Society of America reached out to me and asked me to help with their external communications and do some volunteering for them with my writing. And that's been a really meaningful, really experience for me. And I've talked about this before on with in other settings, but coming out of the military in the U.S., they roll out the red carpet for you, and they kind of treat you like you've accomplished a lot of things that in reality I didn't, and I had this unearned deference and respect that I felt I didn't earn, that allowed me to have kind of like a base of credibility that often made me uncomfortable. And I've realized that like I don't need to be ashamed of my privilege or my veteran status. I can use that as a way of amplifying the voices of people who aren't being heard, which is something that having a kid who can't speak for himself, that reinforced that for me. And so I like to write on behalf of other people who aren't being heard. I became interested in the Uyghur genocide, and I got connected with Rushan Abbas, who's the most prominent Uyghur American activist in the U.S., and I had a conversation with her, and I wrote about that. I'm really interested in Native Americans in the U.S. and indigenous peoples, and the conditions on reservations, and I'm starting to write more about that. I'm in the process of writing a series of essays about that. I'm really interested in AI and the ethical component of this technology that is going to change the way we interact with reality in a very profound way.
Yeah.
And so I'm just finding a lot of different things that interest me that have to do with either technology or marginalized people that maybe aren't being heard, but maybe I can, in my own small way, amplify their voice and make them feel validated and make them feel a little bit more heard than they are now. And I think that's what life is about to me. It's about finding ways to use your gifts, your talents, not just to further your own career or enrich yourself, but to help other people. I think that's what makes the world better. I mean, my dad always taught me when you leave a room, leave it a little better than you found it. So I try to apply that to my life too. I'd like to leave the world a little better than I found it. So.
Right. That's really, what really comes through, like I even mentioned in the introduction, is the authenticity and the sensitivity and the integrity in what you do, and I really appreciate you being open and forthright about this. And there's a certain, obviously, when you put yourself out there on topics like this, there's a certain vulnerability that you have to sort of you expose yourself to the world. So I really appreciate you for having written that article and for carrying on doing what you're doing. And I'm really thankful that you came on the podcast to have a conversation with us. And yeah, thank you so much for the chat. And I hope maybe we do another talk at some point in the
Yeah,
future.
I
Thank
just
you
have
so
to
much.
say, Ramesh, I'm blown away by the deep thought that you applied to this conversation, and I think it's really unfortunate that you are not a more prominent voice in the U.S. than you are, and I hope that you continue to do this because I think you bring a lot of nuance and thought and sort of just calm stability to this conversation that I think is sorely needed. So I really hope you continue doing what you're doing, and I'm just so grateful that you gave me the opportunity to have this discussion with you.
Thank you so much, Greg. Have a nice day, and maybe
Have
just
a good
chat
night.
soon.
Thanks for staying up
You
late
too.
for me too. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem.